Hey everyone, thanks for checking out Saturday Sauna Night. It's been a while, but now we're down to 11 days until the Michigan Inland Trout Opener. And for me and a lot of other folks across the state, this is kind of like getting ready for Christmas a little bit. And so I wanted to take some time and just talk a little bit about why that's such a special time of year for me, for so many people. Share a little bit from some of John Voelker's writings. He wrote a lot about opening day, and kind of look back at opening days past, and sort of think about some of the fish and some of the places and some of the people I got to be with. So grab your towel, get ready to throw some steam. Time for the Saturday Sauna Night podcast. All right, well, thanks again for checking out Saturday Sauna Night. It's been a while. I don't think I've put out a new episode since late February, and kind of got lazy with clipping episodes and posting to social media, which I still need to do. I had a couple roadblocks along the way. The most recent of which was my new laptop that I bought last November. I want to say it's high end, but a pretty nice Lenovo IdeaPad. I found it really nice, and you know, pretty comparable to like a MacBook or something. But it decided to just turn off one day when I plugged it in, and never turn back on. And so I was able to ship it back out, and they repaired it. I'm assuming it was something to do with the mechanism that recognizes a charger's plugged in. Anyway, long story short, I haven't had a reliable laptop to do a podcast with, and so tonight I'm actually talking to my new GoPro. I got the GoPro Hero 8 with the media mod, and so we're going to find out how good this microphone works, and see how GoPro video quality works for the podcast. So don't plan on doing this all the time in the future, but hey, I wanted to give it a trial run before I take it out and take it fishing with me for the opener. So a couple other things I had started working on sort of in the meantime while I wasn't putting out any new episodes or anything. I finally did a winter camping trip after years of wanting to, and then trying to plan something, and then just never really having the right equipment, never really putting, I guess, enough effort into finding a good time and place to do it. But it was the end of March. I was lucky to have a really nice, it was like 45 degrees and sunny that day. And I just decided to go to a local state forest campground that I visited during the summer. But I like to visit the lake there to fish. It's a rainbow trout lake, and so I went. And this is one of the campgrounds that actually is open year round. And I highly doubt anyone's ever camped there in the winter except for me, but I did. Set up a hammock, and I got a cold weather sleeping bag, rated down to 10 degrees. Brought my regular sleeping bag, brought a quilt, brought probably more stuff than I needed. But I took a lot of video footage and was trying to put together a little video, just kind of celebrating spring and sleeping outside under the stars on a cold night. It wasn't that cold. It got down into the low 20s, and just one of the coolest things I've ever done, and definitely want to do again. But I was editing together the footage from that when my laptop decided to the battery died, and then it wouldn't recognize that a charger was plugged in. So I'm hoping that I still have that footage, but we'll see. So here we are, almost to the 2023 Trout Opener, and I was trying to think about like something unique and interesting to say about the opener, because there's been so much that's already been said, and not just about the trout opener, but about any type of season opener, whether it's bow hunting, bird hunting, firearm deer season, the walleye opener in May, any number of seasons that kind of correlate with hunting, fishing, camping, any sort of outdoor activity, really. The trout opener is interesting because of the time of year it falls in Michigan. So the only other state I've ever really gone fishing for trout in is Wisconsin. And to my knowledge, at least when I was there like 6 or 7 years ago, there's actually like an early season that starts in January. So you can actually go out and fish in the winter, catch and release. And I think I don't remember if it's flies only or if it's just artificial lures only. And then there's like the regular season that starts then later, and theirs might be, I don't remember when it is. I don't remember if it's earlier or later than Michigan. But the time the Michigan Trout Opener falls is the end of April. It's the last Saturday in April, which is April 29th this year. And it's an interesting time of year just because of the patterns of weather that usually are sort of moving through about that time of year. So I've lived in the UP long enough to know kind of what to expect. Some years are a little different than others, but just in the short, I'm trying to think back, 6 years. This will be my 6th year, I believe, fishing the opener. So in the few short years I've been fishing it, it kind of seems like it's a toss-up on whether or not there's going to be snow and whether or not there's going to be ice on the lakes. And I kind of learned the hard way that stream fishing for trout at the end of April in the Upper Peninsula usually is not feasible unless you're fishing for steelhead on a Great Lakes tributary somewhere. So this year is kind of playing out a little bit like last year. Last year I was looking back at some pictures I took on this day a year ago, and I'll try and include these on the video here, but I was kind of surveying the lakes I wanted to fish for the opener, and I was getting a little worried because as of today, but last year, one of the main lakes I wanted to fish was still totally frozen over. Now, I don't know if you could have walked out on that ice, if it would have been safe or not. There was a little bit of open water by the shore, but kind of a midwinter looking scene. And it was like that until like right the week of the opener. Last year we stuck pretty close to home. We fished a couple lakes just about probably 30 minutes away, and so I actually went down and took a drive a couple of times before opening day to sort of check out ice conditions, and sort of at the last minute, I think it was just, I don't know the exact number, but it must have been 2 or 3 days before the opener is my guess on when those lakes finally opened up. And so we fished, and it wasn't super successful last year. I caught one retired broodstock fish that was decent size, but just I've kind of lost excitement for those fish. When I first started fishing for brook trout, I of course I was interested in at first catching fish and then eventually catching big fish. And I still want to catch big fish, of course, but when Well, so right here, this is the first big brook trout I caught. This one was 15 and a half inches, and I decided to have it mounted. It's a skin mount, and it looks really nice. Beautiful square tail, perfect fins. It did not look like that when I caught it. When I caught this fish, it was missing most of its dorsal fin. Its tail was all chewed up and frayed. Its pectoral fins were just kind of the white leading edges, just kind of like knobs. And it was an ugly looking fish. And not knowing better at the time, I assumed it maybe had been attacked by another fish, or tried to been eaten by something. Well, it turns out the more I learned about fish hatcheries and our stocking programs that are, not just here in Michigan, but across the U.S. and in Canada, the hatchery keeps adult fish, brood stock, to collect eggs from, of course, and then they hatch the new fish, and that's the majority of the fish that are stocked are small. They call them fingerlings, just juvenile fish. But they collect those eggs from adult fish that live most of their lives at the hatchery, and when they go to retire them because they're getting too old. I don't know what their criteria are for retiring a broodstock fish, but they will plant these fish in various lakes. And it can be kind of cool because they're relatively easy to catch because they've lived in a hatchery and they're big. But the more I've learned about trout fishing and about hatcheries and it's kind of a tricky balance, right? Between trying to promote natural reproduction and good habitat, good quality habitat, and supplementing that, or in some cases, trying to reintroduce these fish to places they used to be, using stocking. So I guess moral of the story is I'm not that interested in retired broodstock fish anymore. And most of the lakes I fish now actually don't have them anyway. But last year on the opener, I caught one. And my friends who I was with, that was the only fish we caught at the first lake. And so it was getting pretty windy, so we moved over to a small pond, artificial lures only. It's one I had fished before and never really caught any big fish. I'd caught a handful of smaller ones. This is a lake where fish have to be at least 15 inches to keep. So it's considered a trophy brook trout lake. And nobody caught a fish there. It was a lot more protected from the wind and probably a little bit more enjoyable to paddle around. But no one caught a fish. And so they decided to call it a day. I wasn't quite done. Opening day of trout season, I like to pretty much be out there all day. And so I stopped off at a little creek that I've fished before on the opener, near a waterfall. And I knew I could catch brook trout there. I knew they probably wouldn't be very big, but I knew I could catch them. And so I went there. 30 minutes later, I had another 4 beautiful eating size brook trout to take home that looked so much nicer than the broodstock fish I had caught. So I was fortunate to have a nice limit of fish last year. Now, I could do a whole separate episode about keeping your limit of trout and when catch and release is better and when catch and cook is better. So I guess I'll just say for now, one of the things is pretty much every water I fish is a stocked water that's managed as a catch and take fishery. Natural reproduction is thought to be pretty limited or non-existent, and the fish are put there for people to catch. So do with that what you will, but that's at least when it comes to brook trout, that's kind of my thinking behind it. So that was last year's opener. thinking back to 2 years ago, it was kind of an anomaly. We lost all of our snow really early, lakes thawed early, and come the opener, we had actually been through several warm periods, a couple cold periods, and didn't really have to deal with any ice or snow. And so that year, 2021, there was a bigger group of us, and we ventured out to a lake that I had visited before, never caught a trout out of, but I knew this was still in my days when I was interested in chasing broodstock fish. I knew it was stocked with retired broodstock, and so I thought it'd be a great place to try the opener. Pretty remote lake, and to my surprise, we got there relatively early in the morning, but there must have been about 5 or 6 trucks there already when we got there. And mind you, this lake is in the middle of nowhere. There's like almost no cell service, no paved roads, not really any signs either. Like, you have to know where it is or have it on a map, or have the GPS coordinates to find it. Yeah, even if you drive right by the gravel road that goes by it, you wouldn't even know it's there because it looks like you're going down a four-wheeler trail to get to it. So anyway, we went out there. I was a little disappointed that there were all these other people, but we did all manage to catch one fish, all pretty big. I think the smallest was like 13 and a half, and the biggest was like 16. But again, these were retired broodstock, so they were all a little bit ugly. But sometimes catching a big fish is fun. And so that was that. We visited one other lake, and caught a handful of smaller fish. But that afternoon and evening, the weather kind of shifted. It had been probably in the mid 50s, even 60 degrees in the morning, and a little bit humid even. And by evening, we were driving back to my brother's house where we were staying, and there were these big wet snowflakes coming down, probably 2-3 inches across. And this cold front blew in, and the next morning, Sunday morning, we went out and fished again, the second lake, and managed to catch a few fish, but it was kind of cold and miserable. But that was the 2021 opener. The 2020 opener, 3 years ago. That was interesting because everyone was locked down, and it was kind of the beginning of COVID. And it also, I felt like the weather kind of matched the just the whole lockdown lifestyle, because winter just did not want to leave that year. And come the opener, lakes were still iced over, which isn't uncommon up here, I don't think, but it's a little unusual to have that much ice and snow still at the end of April. Fortunately, the weather was actually really nice on opening day, and I went out by myself, and I went to this little stream that I knew had a pool at the base of a waterfall that would be, open water, and pretty shallow in the summertime, so I knew if it was flooded in the spring, it would probably be okay. And I managed to catch some nice little brook trout to take home. 4 years ago, I had just, Sarah and I had just had our first child a week before the opening day of trout season. And so, I knew I didn't make plans, of course, to go anywhere, but at that point we had been home for a while, for about a week, and there was a lot of downtime because she was on maternity leave from work, and I think I had a week or 10 days or something I had taken off. And so I just ventured out close to town where we were and visited a Lake Michigan tributary, try to look for some steelhead. And this was a stream that, even though it was a steelhead stream, it didn't open for fishing until the inland opener. And I saw a lot of steelhead. This was an interesting little creek because you could always go there around this time of year and see these big Great Lakes steelhead coming up to spawn. It was really cool. It's actually where I caught my first steelhead. Not that year. I didn't catch any out of there that year. So I visited that for a while. It was kind of fun just to be out and especially to see these fish. That is just one of the neatest experiences. If you've never been in a stream that is shallow and clear enough to see steelhead or brown trout or salmon coming up to spawn, or just kind of hanging out in the river, super cool. And didn't catch any, but really gave me a better appreciation, I think, for just the life cycle of these fish and the places they inhabit, and just kind of how they reproduce and continue. So I stopped off at this little pond, this little stocked pond on the way home. It was the same one I caught this one in, actually. And I did pull out another old retired broodstock fish. Ugly, chewed up, missing most of its tail. It probably would have been about an inch longer if it had its whole tail. But going out on the opener, it's just fun to catch something, And at that point, I was still pretty excited about these big broodstock fish. 5 years ago, 2018. 2018, I don't actually remember if I fished opening day or if I fished like the following weekend or later that week. I don't really have a good record of it, and so I'm not really sure what went on there. But I didn't catch any fish, and this must have been about a week after the opener for inland trout season. I decided to drive up north to a river I had fished the previous summer, done really well at for brook trout, and I guess I didn't have a very good eye for detail and paying attention to weather patterns and the fluctuations of rivers and seasons. I guess I just had never really taken a good hard look at what a river in the UP looks like at the end of April, beginning of May. Most of them are flooded out beyond their banks. Like right now, we've had, especially the western UP has had really bad issues with flooding and washouts and stuff. So anyway, I decided to go up and visit this stream. This wasn't on the opener. This was like the next week, beginning of May, and I don't know why I was surprised, but I was surprised to see it blown out beyond its banks, and I could hardly even, go down to the water, and cast it in a few times and just was catching sticks. But I think a few days later is when I caught my first steelhead back in that little tiny creek that flowed out into Lake Michigan. And so I kind of consider that my 2018 opening trout opener fish, even though it wasn't actually on the opener. It was later. But that was a cool fish because it was in this little tiny stream, so I was watching it, and it it was one of the males that was kind of fighting over spawning privileges, I guess. And now I know too, it's not really a good idea to be actively targeting fish like when they're in the act of spawning, and these ones weren't, but they were probably pretty close. Either way, I kept casting out this little spinner, this little Meps. It was like a size 1 spinner. It wasn't very big, and eventually this fish bit it, and it wasn't a very long fight because the fish wasn't even that far from me. I was watching it in this creek the whole time, and I barely fit into my net. I remember being amazed at, it wasn't a huge steelhead. It was like just over 20 inches, but it I remember it looking much smaller in the water, and then when I finally got it in my net, I was like, wow, these are pretty big fish. So then, finally, 6 years ago, 2017 was my first trout opener, and I visited a couple different streams and didn't catch anything, but I just kind of smile when I think back to this, because I still am not a great fly fisherman, but I visited this stream, and I'm not positive if the section I visited even has trout in it. It might. But I visited it, it was pretty flooded, and I was casting dry flies and just kind of letting them drift down, and realizing now, like, that probably wasn't the best tactic. Like, if I was gonna catch something out of there, I probably should have been either using sinking flies, nymphs or something, to get the bait down, or the old worm and sinker trick. So those are my trout openers. It's been something that kind of started out as just curiosity and wanting to sort of learn more about the fish and the sport, and it's become a tradition. And I've had a handful of years I've gone out by myself, and I've had a handful of years where I've gone out with a group, and both have been really awesome. I think as I get older, I'm learning to appreciate the time with friends more, but I also appreciate the time by myself more too, just because I don't get a whole lot of it, just having young kids. And so this year, looking forward to this year, coming up in 11 days, there's a group of 4 of us, and we're going to be venturing out, and man, I tell you, my planning and my my thought process for this has gotten so much more detailed. That doesn't guarantee success for fish, but at least we'll have the other parts taken care of. We have a cabin we're staying in. It's a rustic cabin, which will be really fun. It'll be nice to have a roof over our heads, and a wood stove in case it's cold. And I have a whole list of lakes. Realistically, we're going to be fishing all day Saturday and maybe a little bit Sunday morning, so it's not really that much time on the water, but I sort of have my A-list lakes that I really would like to get to. Of course, they're the most difficult to get to. They're just kind of far from paved roads, so kind of hoping the snow and mud situation is passable, and but I'm not going to worry, because if not, I have my Plan B lake, and I have my Plan C lakes that are like right off the paved road. I even have Plan D, which is to go up to Lake Superior and just cast at some of the river mouths for salmon and stuff. So Plan D is only if all the lakes are still frozen over and inaccessible. But it's going to be a great time. Regardless of the weather, it's always great to have a group of people and see some new water. That's one thing I'm excited for this year too, is we should be checking out some lakes that are, well, new to all of us, because out of the group, I'm probably the one who frequents these places the most. But these are some lakes that I've been kind of researching and trying to collect a little bit of info on, and they're not places I would go all the time, just because they're kind of far from home. But this will be a great chance to see some new water and be outside. I kind of think of the Inland Trout Opener almost as like my start of summer, because the weather generally isn't anything like summer, but really at that point, I spend most of my free time outside then for like the rest of the year, um, right up through November and December. With hunting season and with early ice for ice fishing and with skiing, snowshoeing, fat tire biking. Those things kind of all fade as the spring wears on, but once the trout opener starts, it kind of is like, it's almost like a reset. And kind of like a chance to start over outside again and sort of break the bad habits of kind of being lazy and sitting inside during March and April when you want it to be spring but it's still winter. And so it's kind of the point in the year where that sort of breaks for me and resets, and I get excited about being outside again. And like I said, that's then kind of the rest of the year. So where did I put those? I had my fishing logs from seasons past, but I don't know where I put them. Doesn't matter. I kind of just recounted them all, probably in too much detail for you. But that's kind of why the opener is special to me. And, one of the first people who got me thinking about this, before I even started fishing, was John Voelker. So this, of course, is his classic, Trout Madness. I've talked about it on the podcast before. It's one of my all-time favorite books. It's something I could read over and over and over again. And I was trying to think about why, because it's just a collection of short fishing stories. But to me, for one thing, these stories are all set in the Upper Peninsula. These are places that, for the most part, I'm familiar with. And I think the way he writes and just his love for the land and the place really shows through. You can tell he really loved being out there, not just trying to catch fish, but being out there with friends, being out there, observing the changes in season that are happening. All these other little details that are easy to miss if you're too hyper focused on just catching your limit or catching the biggest fish or whatever. And so this book, he starts off with the very first chapter being the first day, the opening day of trout season. And so back in the 1950s when this was written, I don't know how long this goes back, but I know opening day of trout season in Michigan has always been the last Saturday in April. At least since this was written, but I think before that even, probably as long as the DNR has existed and fishing seasons have existed. But he starts off, he kind of uses the analogy of a kid waiting for Christmas. He says, aren't fishermen merely permanently spellbound juveniles who have traded in Santa Claus for Isaac Walton? But the part that I love reading are his fishing logs or excerpts from them. And so before he does that, though, he talks a little bit about kind of what's going on with the weather and with the landscape at this time of year, at the end of April in the Upper Peninsula. Because if you've never been up here in late April, it's surprising how much snow you'll find. And that even varies from, from region to region within the UP. We have areas right now that do not have snow, and we have areas right now that have probably close to 2 to 3 feet of snow still. So it's interesting, and doesn't always play nice with your outdoor plans. But he says, since this fisherman dwells at latitude 45, it should come as no great shock to learn that on most opening days I am obliged to draw rather heavily on this supply of magic to keep up my own drooping spirits. He's talking about the magic of the opening day and just being outside again. A lot of the things I was talking about. Sometimes I think I have original thoughts, but I guess this is a kind of a universal thing, I think, for anyone who does this sort of thing. He says it is sometimes difficult to remain spellbound while mired to the hubcaps in mud. Our big opening day problem is twofold: to know where to find ice-free open water, and then be able to get there. During the ordeal, we are sometimes driven to drink. Excuse me. Our opening day is the last Saturday in April, ordinarily a disenchanting season of the year that finds most back roads badly clogged, if not impassable, and a 4-pound ice chisel a more promising weapon with which to probe our trout waters than a 4-ounce fly rod. Our lakes and ponds are usually still ice-locked. Our rivers and streams are usually in their fullest flood, and the most sensible solution is to try to remember a partially open spring-fed pond or beaver dam, and then spend a good part of the day trying to get there. Hence it is my fishing pals and I usually take several preseason reconnaissance trips on snowshoes, but regardless of the day, always we bravely go forth, come fire, flood, or famine, or the fulminations of relatives by marriage. And then he talks about trekking in on snowshoes, and I don't know if this is real or not, because Voelker did take some literary license in his works, but he talks about one year they went out to this pond, this spring-fed pond, on snowshoes, and there was still a foot of ice, except for this one open spot where springs were coming up, and he casted dry flies and took 8 trout on dry flies, skidding them back across the ice. He says, if you don't believe it, don't let it bother you. I'm not quite sure that I believe it myself. But then he gets into his fishing logs, kind of all the interesting stuff, just minus the pressure and water temperature and all that technical stuff that a lot of folks keep track of, which I probably should start keeping track of too. Trying to see if there's any real interesting ones here. It's just fun reading these because, these are places. These are places around the UP that I might not have been to them, but I definitely know where they are, and I've probably looked on a map. One of my hobbies is spending time scouring maps, Google Earth, and different satellite maps, and trying to map out the spots he writes about in his books. It's fun reading about driving in these old, I don't know if they had a Model T or what these were, but these old cars. He had this old fishing car that he kind of decked out specifically for, getting down these back roads. And of course, this is back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So it's fun reading them because they're not all full of just talking about the fish they caught. A lot of years there's not even a fish caught. 1945, to Ted Fulcher's camp with Bill Gray and Carl Winkler. Raw, cold, northeast wind. Didn't wet a line. Won $17 at poker. Slept like a log. Oh gosh. What else? There's a pretty entertaining one here somewhere where he talks about they're back at fish camp. Oh, here it is. 1946, to Frenchman's Pond with gang. Our fly lines froze in the guides, thawed lines, and drove to South Camp, where Leo broke out a bottle of rare old brandy. Evidently it was too old. After the third round, I suddenly rose and clapped my hand to my mouth and ran outside. Guess I had better stick to the reliable brands of medium rare 1-year-old cookin' whiskey, the kind designed for peasants of distinction, bent on extinction. Just fun and nice to know that, 80 years ago, they same sort of things they were dealing with up in the UP here. Wanting to get outside and start up all these activities that traditionally are summertime things. Having to deal with the snow and the ice and when that north wind shifts and comes across Lake Superior and brings down that cold Canadian air, it makes you think twice. But either way, it's wonderful to be out there. Either way, we're gonna have a great opener this year. I am so excited for it.